Hello, everyone. In 2013, the quiet town of Danville, Kentucky, was home to Andrew Hawkins Smith and his happy little family. The young boy lived with his parents, Michael and Angie, and his 13-month-old baby sister, Naomi. Michael first met Angie at a church service, and from that moment, their love story began to blossom. Angie, a kind-hearted woman and Michael's first love, brought him a deep, fulfilling happiness. Their lives were already filled with joy, but the arrival of their two children, 9-year-old Andrew and 13-month-old Naomi, made everything even more perfect. Wanting to spend as much time together as possible, Michael and Angie decided to homeschool Andrew. It was a choice that kept the family close-knit and bonded. Every morning, the Hawkins Smiths would head to Michael and Angie's pawn shop together. It was a daily routine brimming with love. But one fateful morning, everything changed in an instant, plunging the Hawkins Smith family into a horrifying tragedy no one could have imagined. A child's desperate call. At 9:17 a.m. on September 20th, 2013, the 911 dispatch center in Kentucky received a chilling call. On the other end was 9-year-old Andrew Hawkins Smith, whispering in a panic as he reported a robbery and murder unfolding at his family's pawn shop in Danville. Tragically, as the operator tried to gather more details, a baby's cry pierced through the call, heightening the tension. Andrew and his little sister had to stay silent. Any noise could alert the robber to their hiding spot inside the shop. The operator quickly traced the call's location and dispatched a patrol team to the scene. Within 6 minutes, police officers arrived. Sensing the urgency, they attempted to enter through the front door, only to find it locked from the inside. With no other option, they smashed the glass and stormed in. The first thing they saw was a large streak of blood right in front of them. One officer later recalled, "I thought I was prepared, but what I saw was so horrific. It's something I'll never forget for the rest of my life." Inside, they quickly found 3 bodies sprawled across the floor. The pressing concern was whether the killer was still in the shop, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. Following the 911 operator's guidance, they swept the scene to locate the 9-year-old boy. Eventually, they discovered Andrew and Naomi hiding in a corner of the office. The terrified siblings were immediately taken to the police station. Though shaken, they were miraculously unharmed. A coroner was called to examine the bodies, 2 men and a woman. The crime scene was chaotic. The pawn shop stocked guns and ammo, likely mixing murder weapons with merchandise and complicating the investigation. The first body was a woman near the cash register. Across from her lay a man, and nearby, a trail of blood led to a third body, a man, in the back of the shop. Police suspected one of the bodies had been moved to a spot hidden from the front entrance. All 3 victims had been shot multiple times, possibly even after they'd fallen. Shell casings at the scene pointed to a .22 caliber gun as the murder weapon. Charlene and Barbara, the grandmothers of Andrew and Naomi, raced to the scene to check on their grandkids. From a distance, they spotted yellow police tape stretched behind patrol cars. As they got closer, officers stopped them from approaching. In that moment, both collapsed in grief, realizing their children were gone. The 2 victims near the front were identified as Michael and Angie Hawkins Smith, the shop's owners and parents of Andrew and Naomi. The third was Daniel Dan Smith, a 60-year-old regular customer who often traded gold there. A suspicious detail. At first glance, it looked like a botched robbery. Pawn shops are easy targets for thieves after cash and valuables. But one detail didn't fit. Dan Smith's briefcase, stuffed with money, sat open on the counter, untouched. Mike's and Smith's wallets were still on them, and $1,000 in the cash register hadn't been taken. Not a single dollar. If this was a robbery, why didn't the killer grab the cash before fleeing? And if it wasn't a robbery, what was the motive? This led police to suspect the victims might have been targeted for reasons beyond theft. Could this have been an assassination? And if so, was Dan Smith the intended mark? Smith was a gold dealer who often carried a briefcase full of cash. His wife explained he followed a fixed routine certain days of the week, withdrawing money from the bank, then visiting pawn shops. Based on her account, investigators went to Lawson's Jewelers in Harrodsburg, just 19 minutes from the Hawkins Smith shop. Employees there said that on the day of the murders, Smith walked in with his familiar briefcase, chatted cheerfully with the cashier as usual, and less than an hour later, he was dead. News of the murders spread like wildfire through Danville and nearby areas, leaving everyone stunned. Never before had such a tragedy struck this small, peaceful town. Reports of 2 kids losing their parents in a single morning flooded the airwaves, sparking outrage across Danville. The community demanded justice, urging police to find the killer and bring closure for Andrew and Naomi. Police believe the suspect escaped through the garage door, slipping away into an alley without a trace. The killer remained at large, and with no clear motive or leads, the investigation hit a dead end. Who could have wanted to destroy 2 families and orphan these innocent children? A suspect emerges. Just as the investigators were grasping at straws, an unexpected call broke the case wide open with a crucial lead. The caller said that after seeing a Facebook post about the pawn shop murders in Danville, Kentucky, he immediately thought of his friend, Alan Keith. In his memory, Keith was the one running that shop. Without a second thought, he dialed Keith's number. What raised suspicion was when the caller revealed that Alan Keith, a longtime friend, had made cryptic remarks about the crime. Acting on this tip, police launched an investigation. They learned that Michael and Angie Hawkins-Smith had known Pastor Alan Keith from their days as youth ministers in the local church. But ministry work didn't pay enough to support their family, and Michael had confided in Keith about needing another income source. That's when Pastor Keith made an enticing offer: open a pawn shop. Beyond his clerical duties, Keith owned and operated multiple pawn businesses. Typically, a pastor and a pawn shop don't go hand in hand. But Pastor Keith had a unique passion for precious metals, VHS tapes, CDs, and other oddities. For him, life was a blend of the Bible and these worldly treasures. While Pastor Keith loved God and preached every Sunday at churches across Pulaski County, he couldn't resist the allure of money, especially gold. Under his guidance, Mike joined the business, working at the ABC Gold Games pawn shop and its other branches. With this new venture, their lives began to thrive. Soon after, the family welcomed baby Naomi, bringing even more joy to the Hawkins-Smith household. After digging deeper, police learned Pastor Keith lived in Somerset, about a 50-minute drive from the crime scene. Strangely enough, he happened to be in Danville on the day of the murders. On September 20th, he drove over 43 miles to a local pharmacy to pick up a prescription for his wife, despite not being a regular customer there. When asked why he was in Danville that day, he didn't hesitate to admit he'd gone to get the medication. Keith recounted every tiny detail of his trip that day to the police. But what stood out were his odd comments about the case. Basically, Michael and Smith were just bystanders, he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, but they weren't innocent. They cost me a lot of money. Meanwhile, investigators dug into his life and uncovered a key fact. Keith had once been the sole owner of the Danville pawn shop. Crippled by debt and poor financial management, he'd been forced to hand over ownership to the Hawkins-Smiths. Suspicion now zeroed in on Pastor Keith, but there was a hitch. He claimed he was at the pharmacy during the murders. If his alibi checked out, and if security footage showed him there, he could be ruled out as a suspect. Investigators rushed to pull video from the pharmacy where Pastor Alan Keith said he'd picked up the prescription. If he was really there when the shooting went down, he couldn't be our guy, they reasoned. But after reviewing the footage, they saw Keith arriving at 9:24 a.m., just 8 minutes after the murders. That made it impossible for him to be in 2 places at once. This alibi could have cleared Pastor Keith entirely, throwing the investigation off track. But one person held the key to unraveling the truth. Andrew, the 9-year-old survivor who'd made the 911 call that morning. If Andrew could provide any evidence placing Pastor Keith at the pawn shop, not the pharmacy, the case might finally break open. According to Andrew, September 20th started like any other day. The Hawkins-Smith family arrived at the shop and opened up at 9 a.m. Andrew played with toys in the corner while his parents prepped for the day. Soon, their first customer walked in, Dan Smith, a familiar face who often traded gold. As Andrew's dad chatted with Smith, his mom, Angie, cradle Naomi near the cash register. Everything seemed normal until another man stepped inside. He looked kind of weird, Andrew recalled. The man pulled out a gun, his voice rising into a shout. "Everybody get on the floor." Terrified, they all complied. Andrew, his mom, and Naomi huddled together in a corner, trembling. Peeking out in horror, they watched as the intruder fired 8 shots. Amid the chaos, Andrew saw his dad collapse under the gunman's barrel. In his final moments, Mike begged the killer to stop, but it was too late. Before he could finish, the gun swung towards Smith. After finishing Smith off, the man turned, searching for Angie and the kids. Knowing survival was slim, Angie faced her children and pointed to the only hiding spot in the shop. "She told me to run to the back with my sister. I crawled into the office, set her down, and sat right next to her," Andrew recounted. From their hiding place, Andrew heard 4 more shots ring out, then silence. Both he and Naomi stayed as quiet as possible. "I remember crawling to the door and seeing Mom lying in a huge pool of blood," Andrew said, his voice heavy with pain. Protecting Naomi became Andrew's sole focus. He grabbed the office phone and dialed 911, hoping help would arrive before the killer found them. When police later showed him photos, Andrew pointed straight at Pastor Keith. A 9-year-old called 911 to report his family being murdered. "But what really hit us was what he did before that," one officer said, choking up. "He carried his little sister to the office and shielded her with his own body. That kid's a hero." Thanks to Andrew's bravery, quick thinking, and sharp memory, Pastor Keith's alibi began to crumble. The pieces collected after the murders were finally falling into place. Keith owned a silver minivan, and just before and after the shooting, a security camera caught a similar vehicle lurking near the pawn shop. Andrew's secret 911 call also provided a critical timeline, proving Keith had time to move from the shop to the pharmacy. Without this, his alibi might have held, letting him slip away. On October 9th, 2013, just 19 days after the massacre, police had enough evidence to arrest Pastor Keith. They executed search warrants at 3 locations: his home, his church, and his Somerset pawn shop. An investigator posed as a customer to scope out the shop. During the search, they found a box containing parts that could assemble a silencer, perfectly matching the theory that a silencer was used in the killings. This explained the high-pitched sound Andrew heard when his parents were shot. Beyond that, police uncovered more damning evidence. Spent .22 caliber shell casings that perfectly matched those found at the crime scene, along with a shooting target riddled with bullet marks just outside the pawn shop. It was clear proof he'd practiced before carrying out the murders. In the end, Pastor Keith was arrested at his own shop without putting up a fight. But what outraged the public even more was his shamelessness. Just days earlier, on that Friday, he'd gunned down innocent people. Then, come Sunday, he calmly stepped up to the pulpit, preaching to a congregation that included the 2 children of the very people he'd killed. Did he have even a shred of conscience left? Or had greed and selfishness completely clouded his reason and morality? When news broke of Keith's arrest, the Hawkinsmith and Smith families could finally breathe a sigh of relief. To spare the victims' loved ones the agony of a long, drawn-out trial, prosecutors offered Keith a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. As the court prepared for Keith's sentencing, Andrew, grappling with unimaginable grief, found his own way to cope. He started drawing, pouring his deepest thoughts into comic book pages. Andrew had faced a pain no one could fathom. On that fateful day, he proved just how much he took after his parents. He bravely protected his little sister, getting her to safety and calling for help in time to crack the case wide open. More than that, we believe that through those darkest moments, his parents were right there with him, watching over Andrew and Naomi. "Everyone says I'm a lot like my dad," Andrew shared. "It's not just how I look, it's how I act too. And Naomi? She's the spitting image of Mom. I'm so grateful for what I've got. In a way, it feels like me and my sister are living on for them." On May 26th, 2017, Andrew's 13th birthday, the plea deal between Pastor Keith and the prosecution was finalized. Keith was sentenced to life in prison without parole, destined to spend the rest of his days behind bars paying for his crimes. Under the cold-blooded hands of this killer, The Hawkinsmiths didn't survive. But what matters most is that they succeeded in protecting their children.
Hello. Today, we will explore the story of an 11-year-old girl who, in just 2 short years, was abused more than 50 times by 18 men from her village. This shocking number is hard to believe, even for those who know about it. Her father has expressed a desire to take revenge on those who harmed his daughter. So, how did this happen? Let's begin. Due to their poor circumstances, after the birth of their daughter, named Liu, Zhang Daxiang and his wife had to work far away. They only returned home for special occasions like holidays. Liu was raised by her grandparents. However, they also faced their own challenges. Liu's grandfather had a car accident 12 years ago, which left him injured and disabled. He could only move with difficulty using a wooden cane. As a result, taking care of children became a burden for him. Additionally, the family had not only Liu to care for, but also a granddaughter from their second son, who needed attention. In the summer of 2013, Xiang returned to his hometown. However, upon arriving in the village, an elder from his family reminded him to pay attention to his children's well-being. Xiang was puzzled by this advice because at the time his daughter Liu had just graduated from elementary school. Though her academic performance wasn't stellar, she managed to pass all her subjects. At home, Liu was responsible for many tasks, such as laundry and cooking, showing a maturity beyond her years. Xiang had no reason to think his kind and dutiful daughter would have any problems. Despite not fully understanding the elder's words, Xiang decided to secretly observe his daughter. To his surprise, he began noticing some unusual signs. One day, Liu came home on an electric bike that Xiang didn't recognize. He wondered who the owner of the bike could be. Under his questioning, Liu explained that the bike belonged to a school friend who had lent it to her. She said they often hung out together, so her friend let her borrow it for a while. Xiang was a little confused but figured that his daughter was growing up and forming her own friendships. Although he still had doubts, he chose to keep observing her to ensure she was safe. On another occasion, Liu mentioned that the bike belonged to a neighbor named Chen Mu. Hearing this, Xiang grew even more confused. It wasn't easy for him to borrow a bike, so how could his daughter manage it so effortlessly? This made him suspicious. He immediately pulled Liu aside and gently questioned her about the situation. At this point, Liu refused to say anything. Sensing that she was hiding something, Xiang grew more concerned. In frustration, he struck her several times, but she still wouldn't speak. Over the next 2 or 3 days, the beatings continued, and Liu's legs became swollen. Finally, when she couldn't bear it any longer, Liu revealed the truth. She explained that the reason she was able to borrow the electric bike was because Chen Mu had assaulted her. She then recounted her terrifying experiences over the past 2 years. According to Liu, the first time she was harassed was 2 years ago while she was gathering snails in the field. Suddenly, someone grabbed her from behind. Liu was terrified and screamed, but within seconds, a large hand covered her mouth. She only managed to glimpse her attacker, a 74-year-old man from the village named Chen Mu, whose wife had passed away years earlier. At the time, Liu, still a child who knew little about the world, didn't understand what Chen Mo intended to do. His inappropriate touching and behavior, however, filled her with fear. Liu struggled, and eventually, Chen wasn't able to do anything to her. Angry, Chen slapped Liu across the head before leaving. Shaken, Liu hurried home, traumatized by the incident and unable to calm down for a long time. However, she didn't tell anyone. Her parents weren't home, and she didn't feel she could confide in anyone else, so she chose to remain silent. Unfortunately, Liu's silence emboldened Chen. A few days later, realizing that no one had come to confront him, his desire grew. He waited for a moment when Liu went out to pick vegetables, then dragged her back to his house and tied her up with rope. This time, Chen threatened Liu with a knife, and she was unable to resist. He raped her. After this first assault, Chen grew more confident. He raped Liu multiple times, and after each attack, he would threaten her viciously, warning that she must never tell anyone or he would kill her on the spot. Liu, terrified, kept quiet after every threat and assault, but Chen's abuse didn't stop. Instead, he began to view his attacks on Liu as a personal achievement. He even bragged to other men he spoke with about what he had done to her. Before long, a second and third man joined in the abuse of Liu. In a short period of about 2 years, Liu was violated by 3 people at least 20 times. Liu suffered indelible physical and mental injuries. But this was not the end. The actions of the 3 people quickly became the subject of gossip in the village. Not only the lonely old people, but any man who had no intention of doing so was eager to try. Because Liu had no parents by her side and her grandfather was disabled in both legs. With just a little threat and enticement, Liu would obediently let herself be controlled. In such a short period of 2 years, Liu was raped by more than 10 people. When Liu's father, Xiang, learned that his daughter had been raped, he was extremely angry. He grabbed a vegetable knife and rushed out to kill these perverts. But at this time, he was stopped by his family. But just thinking about how his daughter had suffered such great pain over the past 2 years, Xiang blamed himself immensely. He could not imagine how desperate his daughter had been at that time and how she had gone through those years. He could not wait any longer and immediately took his daughter to the local police station to report the incident. During the police investigation, Xiang learned that in the past 2 years, there were 18 people who had had relationships with Liu. Not only were there people in the village, but there were also 2 people from other villages. The oldest was 74 years old, and the youngest was 42 years old. Some of them were lonely old people. Some had families and children. How could they be so cruel to a child? Xiang begged the police to punish these criminals severely. But the development of the incident was beyond his expectations. Because in the end, the police only arrested 10 suspects, not the 18 people that Liu had mentioned. The police explained that one of the remaining 8 people had run away and 7 others had denied having any relationship with Liu, and Liu could not provide concrete evidence to prove their crimes. Therefore, in the end, the prosecution only convicted those 10 people, failing to bring all the rapists to justice. This was a huge shock to Liu's family. However, the subsequent verdict was something that Xiang found hard to accept. After the trial, out of the 10 suspects, only 3, including Chen and 2 others, were charged with rape. The remaining 7 were only charged with indecently abusing children. As we all know, the crime of child abuse is much lighter than rape. Xiang could not accept this and questioned them, but the police said that Liu's relationship with others was of her own free will and for money. The main reason the police said this was because Liu had received money from others, making the rape a voluntary act. The amount of money was sometimes only a few 100,000. The highest was only 280 yuan. These perverts used money to seduce and take advantage of Liu's naivety and ignorance. At that time, Liu was only 11 years old and was threatened with violence to keep her from revealing the truth to others. They took advantage of her family's situation to make Liu not dare to tell her parents for the past 2 years, and that Liu's parents were working far from home. Their income was not high. Moreover, Liu's younger brother was weak and often sick. The money they earned was mostly used to treat his illness. Money was very attractive to Liu, a poor child. Therefore, gradually, she began to use that money to buy snacks. This made Liu not pay attention to the damage that rape brought. Furthermore, Liu lived in a rather secluded village, and her parents were not around for a long time. No one had seriously explained to her the harm of being raped at a young age. Without the strong resistance as at first, others thought that Liu had accepted it. This made the attackers more and more daring, and the number eventually increased to 18. Although Liu admitted that she had received money, Xiang believed that his daughter and other lost women had certain differences. In order to protect his daughter's rights, Xiang contacted major media and sent complaints to many relevant agencies. Quite a few people immediately spoke up in support of Liu, arguing that receiving money could not be the basis for a conviction because Liu was not a prostitute, but was simply too young to understand and was forced by others. Therefore, this should be treated as rape. Finally, thanks to the efforts of the media and those who pursue justice in society, this case was reviewed by the court. In the end, 10 people were sentenced to between 2 and 7 years in prison by the court. Although the people involved had to pay for their actions, the damage they had caused to Liu was not over. After the incident, the villagers often used Liu's tragedy as a joke after meals. Not only did they not sympathize with Liu, but they also regarded her as a girl who sold her body to get money from others. They scolded her as a prostitute, a whore. In fact, during the more than 2 years that Liu was abused, many people in the village knew about this incident. However, they believed that Liu accepting money was her own idea and did not intervene if the attackers did not violate the law. After the incident, many villagers, especially the relatives who were arrested, thought that it was Liu's fault that made others ashamed. They often talked and criticized her from behind and even did not let their children play with Liu, fearing that Liu would ruin their children. Amidst the gossip and insults of the villagers, Liu did not dare to leave the house, did not dare to go to school. She began to live in seclusion and did not dare to face reality. Xiang saw his daughter become like that and regretted it too late. In order for Liu's life to start over, Xiang took her to Guangzhou, where he could work and take care of her at the same time. The joy was that when the environment changed, there was no more criticism from the surrounding. Liu's spirit gradually recovered. However, no one expected that while God was returning what life had taken from Liu, she disappeared. The incident began on February 23, 2015. That morning, the Hezhou police received an alarming phone call from a man named Zhang Daxiang. He said that his daughter had disappeared. Xiang is from Guangxi and had worked in Hezhou, Guangdong for many years. According to his testimony, on the day his daughter went missing, she went out with her younger sister. At that time, they met a very enthusiastic couple. Not only did they feed the two sisters delicious food, but they also invited them to go out together. Liu was very excited and asked her sister's opinion. But the sister wanted to go to the toilet, so she went back home. Liu went with them alone. After the sister returned home, she told her father about playing with other people. At first, he didn't care too much. He thought that his daughter might just play for a while and that she would return when it got dark. But unexpectedly, Liu didn't return home that evening. That was when Xiang felt something was wrong. He immediately called his daughter, but no one answered. After that, he searched everywhere, but could not find any trace of his daughter. A few days passed quickly, and Liu still did not appear. In order to find his daughter, Xiang posted a large number of missing person notices and kept calling his daughter. But Liu's phone was always turned off. Just when Xiang was worried, a miracle happened. On the 7th day after Liu went missing, her cell phone was finally connected. Her father immediately asked where his daughter was. But at this time, Liu did not know where she was. She just kept crying. And while crying, the call was cut off. Xiang immediately realized that his daughter might be controlled by someone. Xiang Liu knew that he could not find his daughter with his own strength. Therefore, he immediately called the police. After receiving the report, the police determined that Liu might be in Yangjiang City, 300 to 400 kilometers away. However, this city has millions of people, and it is difficult to determine Liu's exact location based on cell phone signals alone. The police hoped that Liu's cell phone could be turned back on and use technical methods to determine her exact location, but unfortunately, Liu never turned her cell phone back on. All clues were suddenly cut off. The disappearance of her daughter made Xiang blame himself a lot, but all current efforts still stopped there. Liu's case today is an extremely heartbreaking case. All these unfortunate tragedies originated from parents who did not care about their children. Liu had no one to rely on when she encountered problems. She could only endure it alone. The second was the coldness of the villagers. As people often say, a good word warms 3 winters. A bad word cools 6 summers. Those who raped Liu must pay the price in prison. But those who made sarcastic and reproachful remarks without taking any responsibility are even more blameworthy. Hopefully Xiang will soon find his daughter and help her overcome the dark reigns of the past. And this is today's case. What do you think about the case? Please leave your comments below this video. If possible, please support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel to follow the next cases. Thank you. Goodbye.